And this brings us to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is a short squeeze on the global Ponzi scheme, effectively. We live in a global Ponzi scheme. All banks are Ponzi schemes, right? Fractional reserve banking, which is a term that's pretty commonly understood, right? The bank lends out more than they have on their books, right? And the justification for this is that, well, it's an acceptable risk because we're stimulating growth in the economy. So but the fact is that they're exposed because if there's a run on the bank, then the bank closes. And we've seen that throughout history. This happens from time to time.
And might be happening again soon.
Could be happening. They created the FDIC, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, after crash 29, and also SIPC and other facilities, government guaranteed to backstop the system. The Federal Reserve Bank is meant to be a backstop to the system. It's supposed to be used in extremis. It's supposed to be there to be a barrier against, essentially bank runs. That's like one of the primary roles of the central bank. But under Alan Greenspan, starting in the 1980s, you have the concept of the activist central bank, who is not there to be the lender of last resort, but the speculator of first order. Like, nobody is speculating harder than the Fed. The Fed's balance sheet is more leveraged than any corporate balance sheet. This leverage, like, if you did an actual accounting of what's held by the Fed, their loan to ratio is probably in the many thousands of percentage points, whereas the highest leveraged corporation in America might be, at most, I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing, but it's nowhere near what the Fed is. The global economy right now is 300% debt to GDP, right? So the GDP of planet Earth is roughly 100 trillion, and the global debt's 300 trillion. So we're living in a 300%, debt to GDP on planet Earth. It's the highest it's ever been. That's number one. But these central banks, nobody's more leveraged than the central banks themselves, because they always come back to the same thing. We're just going to print more money, and they always do. So now in the U.S., they printed $34 trillion. They're printing. And they no longer report the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling has been removed. That's no longer an item that you see reported. That politically, there's nobody saying, like, we have to address the debt ceiling this week because we hit the debt ceiling. We have to raise the debt ceiling. They just said a few months ago that that's being removed. There is no debt ceiling. Just like they just removed also the reporting of M3, which was a reporting of the money supply. They do M2 now, but M3 got too scary. So they don't do M3 anymore. They do M2. I'm sure they'll take away M2. So the indebtedness of the bank is astronomical. And so when you buy Bitcoin, you're doing a rug pull on the central banks, essentially, because they still need, at the base layer of their Ponzi scheme, something. I mean, even the Federal Reserve Bank, when you're all said and done at the Fed, you open the vault, even if you find nothing but a pile of hamster shit, that's still something, right? Whereas with Bitcoin, you're exposing it that not even that hamster shit's going to be worth anything, which you can collateralize that hamster shit and create many trillions of dollars of reverse leverage obligation out of the money, fully hedged.
Someone's making a hamster shit coin right now.
Right,
as we
it's
speak.
hamster shit. I mean, you can't even play around and mention bullshit shit coins anywhere, because some fucking idiot was going to create one, and they'll be like, see. And then it'll have, like, the shitcoin market is so toxic and so dangerous and so fucked up. You can't even play games because there's so many. I'm not going to go there right now, but so the central banks are so leveraged to this thing. So Bitcoin is a rug pull on the global central banking system that is, historically speaking, at no greater point of vulnerability ever in its history. It's never been more vulnerable than right now. It's never less well capitalized than right now. I mean, right. You can go to the games that are being played. They don't just, like, for example, Jay Powell just doesn't call up Jamie Dimon and send him $1 trillion, right? That's not how it works. But what they do is they let Jamie borrow an infinite amount of money from the Fed at 2%. And allow him to lend it back to the Fed at 3% on the same day. That's a known operation with some fancy name. So they can't write the check to Jamie Dimon, but they put it under the machinations of a scheme like this that I just described, and they'll say that this is necessary for whatever reasons. But there's no, it's the same as just writing Jamie a check. And it's just outright corruption and fraud. But it's all couched in these highfalutin, multiple layered Ponzi scheme-esque bullshit, which we've been reporting on for 20 years, which is always kind of the same bullshit, but they have different names for it. Like quantitative easing is actually a fancy name for debt monetization. And the debt monetization is you buy the debt, you issue debt and you buy it. So we used to make fun of banana republics, like in Central America, like in El Salvador, because these countries would issue debt and then buy their own debt. So there was this debt monetization. So you're the only buyer of your own debt. So how does the value of your currency sustain itself? It doesn't. Your currency collapses. So in the United States of America, nobody wants our debt. So we buy our own debt, but we don't call it debt monetization. We call it quantitative easing. And the differentiation that they'll tell you, that the central bank will say why it's not debt monetization, is because they plan to end the scheme someday. See, if it was debt monetization, it would be open-ended. But we plan to end quantitative easing someday. So it's not, it's quantitative easing. So now, recently, they've gone from quantitative easing to quantitative tightening, they say. But they open the spigot to what I just described. You can borrow money from the Fed and lend it back at a higher interest rate and just print money anyway. Like there's always more money being printed in one way or another. And then they just change the language. They change who's doing what to whom. They rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic, but it's still sinking. And it's getting really bad. Like the interview with Tucker Carlson and Putin is, it's just basic facts. It's not anything but facts. The fact is Russia's and the BRICS were 80, 90% using dollars. Now it's down to like 13%. And they're not getting out of the dollar. So who's going to be buying these debt? Who's going to be buying the dollars? Where's the dollar used? And if it's not used, then you have to print more to make up the difference, which means it's inflation, which means that all these videos of these 20-year-olds on YouTube saying, I can't live. I make $2,000 a month. My rent's $1,700. I can't afford food. I have 4 years of college. Well, those are going to be multiplying in the many, many tens of thousands. But no one's going to be able to afford anything, really, because this inflation is an intractable and runaway problem. It's not going away. It's getting much worse because they are in a debt spiral. There's the theory since Reagan, trickle down, was that you print money effectively, lower taxes, the GDP boost would create enough taxable revenue to pay down the debt. That's the theory. But of course, it never, ever, 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 never, ever came close. I mean, under Clinton, actually, his first few years, debt was a little less because of the dot-com boom. There was a boomlet in the 90s, and it kind of like the falling U.S. economy hit a tree branch on the way down, and then that branch broke, and then it started to go down again. But there was a little buffer there for a few years under Clinton 1. So, but it's just continues to go down. So now you're into this debt spiral where it takes, 30 years ago, for every dollar in debt, they would get $1 in GDP. Now I think they have to issue $5 to $6 in debt to get $1 in GDP. And it's just continuing to get worse and worse and worse. And knowing, people who are feeling like they're broke, they are fucking broke, and they're going to get a lot broker because the purchasing power of that money is continuing to fall. Now, activists who are concerned about the well-being of folks, if the world it's a wonderful life, and there's Mr. Potter, who's the capitalist, and there's Jimmy Stewart, who's the lefty, right? And he's the savings and loan, and Frank Capra is a lefty, and he made this genius allegory and the little angels on the bridge, and he's little,
Zozos paddles. Yeah, it's all of that. Yeah.
So if that's the analogy you want to use, then it's Pottersville all the way down. It's nothing but Pottersville. It's getting Oh, it's getting worse. I mean, if every single mom in America is on OnlyFans, what the fuck are we talking about? What kind of society do we live in? You know,
Hey, I saw your mom today on OnlyFans.
what
How-
the fuck is going on here? You
Yeah.
know, this is no Norman Rockwell. Never had mom showing her tits on OnlyFans. That's no Norman Rockwell painting I can remember.
Somebody on the internet make a Norman Rockwell watching somebody's mom on OnlyFans. Somebody's got to do that. There's got to be an AI.
Little Timmy, there's mom in front of the OnlyFans camera, flashing her, swinging her tits around, you know, in that Norman Rockwell style. It's so wholesome.
So
You know, this is where we're at in America. It's not getting any better. Except that mom's won't be able to feed her children, not even on OnlyFans.
right, because she'll be making 100, 200 grand a year in OnlyFans, but her rent will be $6,000 a month or so. She won't be able to afford
Inflation, it's not, you know.
it. Gallon of milk will be 10, 15 bucks.
So, you know, this is what Bitcoin is fixes this, because it's not, you can't print it.
Right.
You can't print it up no matter what the demand is. So
the other thing I say to activists too, when they're like, yeah, but Graham, it'll be another thing. A bunch of rich guys will control it. I said, every piece of Bitcoin you buy, they can't have it. There's only going to be 21 million.
right.
So just try to own even a half of one. I mean, if you own we talked about this last time. If you own a full Bitcoin,
Yeah.
you are ahead of so many people. Like, and that's why I'm like, I just have to put 5 to 10% of your assets in Bitcoin just to play it safe. If just if you got $2,000 in the bank, just put $200 in Bitcoin, and tuck it away, put it on a cold wallet. There's plenty of videos online on how to do that. Learn what it is, and just sit. And you'll 5 years from now, you'll go, thank God I listened to that whack job surfer lefty and his buddy Max. I'm so glad I listened to these two psychos that just do Alex Jones and Michael Saylor impressions all day and talk about people's moms on OnlyFans.
You speak the truth. It's absolutely correct.